Welcome to the Great Basin Fire Potential Briefing for Tuesday, July 18th. This is Gina McGuire. Over the next few days, we will have significant impacts to fire potential due to wind and relative humidity. Today, generally over western and northern Nevada into far southwest Idaho. And then as we move through Wednesday, the winds start to decrease in northern areas, but still will remain breezy with low humidity along the Sierra front. On Thursday, winds will increase again over mainly central and southern Idaho. Relative humidity will drop into the single digits in many of these areas, and also overnight humidity recovery may only recover to between 20 and 30% overnight, especially across northern and western Nevada. Continued wet thunderstorms today over the southern portion of the Great Basin, but a little bit further south than what we saw yesterday, and then thunderstorms will push north again as we move through the middle of the week. Over the last 24 hours, we've seen generally scattered thunderstorms over the eastern half of the Great Basin, and these thunderstorms were on the wetter side, with many areas in the higher elevations seeing up to or above a half-inch of precipitation. Fire activity continues to be high across the Great Basin, with 31 new fires yesterday across the area. Precipitation over the last 7 days has generally been confined to the southern and eastern half of the Great Basin, with very dry conditions north and west. And even over the last 30 days, many areas of the northern and western side of the Great Basin have not seen any precipitation, or certainly what they have seen has been well below normal. How this has translated to our fuel moistures, ERCs, are generally high over now the northern half of the Great Basin and continue to decline over the southern areas. ERCs across parts of the central Idaho mountains down into northern Nevada are well above normal and in some areas near or approaching record highs. 10-hour fuel moisture is still very representative of the risk across the Great Basin due to the high grass crop, and you can see is still very low over really all of Nevada up into Idaho and the western half of Utah. Live fuel moistures continue to decrease, with the exception of the southern areas of the Great Basin with live fuel moisture increasing somewhat. However, still over western and northern areas into western Utah, live fuel moisture is below normal in many cases, and in some areas near record lows. We still do have a fuels and fire behavior advisory out for the areas shaded in red, mainly for the grass loading, which is up to 200 or 300% of normal in some of these areas. And again, as we just saw, ERCs are still high, especially over the northern and western side of this region. The satellite loop from this morning shows an area of low pressure off the west coast, and between this area of low pressure and high pressure over the southwestern U.S., we are getting those gusty southwest winds across much of the northern half of the Great Basin with dry conditions. This will also help suppress again those thunderstorm activity to generally southern Nevada into the southern and eastern half of Utah today. Now looking at the fire potential impacts for today, again increases to fire potential due to gusty winds and low humidity over the northern and western half of Nevada into northern California, along with very dry conditions as you can see in the image on the left. Relative humidity this afternoon will drop into the single digits with poor recoveries. Otherwise, low to moderate fire potential over the southern and eastern areas of the Great Basin due to the monsoon moisture still in place. Today here on the image on the left shows the relative humidity in the single digits over much of the western and northern half of the Great Basin, and higher over eastern areas where we'll see those thunderstorm activity. Looking at the winds, the strongest winds today will be along the Sierra front up into western and northern Nevada, a little bit weaker as you move further east into southern Idaho, but winds still gusting around 30 miles per hour with dry conditions. As we move into Wednesday, continued dry air remains in place over northern and western areas. However, moisture from the monsoon will be allowed to expand again further north across much of Utah and into far southeastern Nevada. We are continuing to highlight the winds generally along the Sierra front tomorrow. However, they will be weakening from what we will see today and likely confined to a much smaller area. If we look at the conditions on Wednesday, still single-digit relative humidity and poor recovery is expected across much of northern and western areas. Again, winds will decrease but still be gusty along the Sierra front. Any of the winds you see further east across Utah and far eastern Nevada will be associated with gusty outflow winds from the continued thunderstorm activity. On Thursday, again, still very little change in the conditions across the Great Basin with wetter thunderstorms to the east and south and dry conditions to the north and west. However, another area of low pressure will push into the northwest, and this will enhance winds once again on Thursday, but most of the gusty winds will be confined to central and southeastern Idaho. Also, parts of south central Idaho may see some gusty winds as well, generally east of Boise. This picture shows the conditions for Thursday. Again, the very dry conditions continuing in the north and west with higher humidity across much of the eastern half of Utah. And again, you can see the gusty winds across the central Idaho mountains into southeast Idaho. Again, anything across Utah is mainly associated with outflow winds from thunderstorms. The overall amount of precipitation for the next 3 days is quite significant across much of southern and the eastern half of Utah into the Arizona Strip and far southern Nevada associated with that monsoon moisture. As we move later in the week, the pattern remains very similar on Friday to what we'll see over the next few days with thunderstorms over the southern and eastern areas and dry conditions north and west. We are not highlighting anything for a significant fire potential map for Friday. As we move into Saturday, we have another area of low pressure that's fairly weak that drops down the west coast, and this may allow some moisture to move back into parts of central and northern Nevada for some isolated thunderstorm activity. We are not currently highlighting anything as right now coverage looks really minimal and not a lot of instability initially. However, as we move into Sunday and this low starts to drop a little bit further south, we'll likely have a little bit more moisture to work with at the mid and upper levels over parts of the northern half of Nevada, and we will continue to monitor this for any highlights due to lightning on our fire potential map. Right now, this pattern is still somewhat uncertain, but we will continue to watch it. On Monday, very similar conditions to Sunday with some moisture still in place over parts of northern Nevada into southern Idaho for possibly some lightning activity, and then still continuing moisture in place over the far southern and eastern side of the Great Basin. The overall 7-day amount of precipitation still highlights the same regions for that significant precipitation with the monsoon. Looking at the 8 to 14-day outlook, which takes us into the very last part of July, still looking at warm temperatures for much of the Great Basin, and above normal precipitation would be most likely over the eastern half of the area with still very dry conditions up into Idaho and possibly still along the Sierra front. That concludes our briefing for today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.